Now, Jose, where are
Hi,
you from?
hi everyone, and we are live, you guys. Sorry for interrupting you. We are, as usual, as good Latinos. We were talking behind the scenes. But thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Liliana Soto, and I'm an investigative reporter for ABC15.
And I'm Allison Rodriguez. Hi, everyone. I'm a journalist with ABC15 as well. Welcome to ABC15 special coverage, our virtual town hall of Hispanic Heritage Month. It's what it's all about, which, of course, kicks off today, is going to be going for the next 4 weeks, all to celebrate the contributions of our Hispanic and Latin Americans to this country.
Yeah, and we're also going to be talking about the importance, the significance of this celebration, part of like why, behind the history of this month, and also about nuestra cultura, right? And so, Allison, take it and present our guests.
Yes, that's what I want to do. Introduce our guest with us today. As you can see, we have two very distinguished guests. We have Jose Cortez. He worked actually as a Cesar Chavez labor organizer. So some living history right here. And we also, we have to have people who study history, right? We've got Dr. Laura Key here with the Arizona Historical Society. You're also the managing editor of the Journal of Arizona History. There you go. So you got a lot on your plate too. Thank you both for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
We have the full package, Allison.
Yeah, we sure do. And we're really excited to have them. Now, Dr. Key, I'm going to actually start with you here as we get a little history lesson, if possible. So can you tell us a little bit about why we celebrate this and how all of it got started?
Well, I think it goes without saying that Hispanic heritage, Hispanic peoples have made an enormous contribution to this country. And it's, we want to celebrate this, that America is a place of Hispanic immigration and people that have fought for their country and worked for their country and tried to make it better. So it actually started in 1968. President Lyndon Johnson signed the National Hispanic Heritage Week bill into law. And it was actually sponsored by Representative George Brown of California. And he wanted to put the bill in that will allow our nation to properly observe and coordinate events and activities to celebrate Hispanic culture and achievement. So it started as in a week, but then later on in 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill that expanded it to 30 days so that we get a whole month of Hispanic Heritage Month because, who doesn't love to talk about this stuff?
There's a lot to, it goes beyond a month, right? But we'll take that and use it for education and research and sharing, right, Lily?
Absolutely.
A whole month of partying, you guys. That's perfect for us Latinos, right?
Eating, drinking, and talking, definitely. Absolutely.
Eating, that's definitely the top for me. But as we're talking about the importance of it and how it all started, I think it's also amazing. I'm beyond blessed to be able to have Jose Cortez with us here. When he shared with me his history and how he came to America and him being, by the side of Cesar Chavez, I just couldn't believe that I had the honor of speaking to him. So Jose, you were telling me, growing up wasn't that easy for you. You migrated from Mexico, from Jalisco to the U.S., and you faced many difficulties as a new immigrant. But you also then worked your way up, and now you're part of history. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, Lily, it's a pleasure being on this program with you and Alice, and of course, Dr. Laura. I want to say that giving me the opportunity to talk about my life and the history that goes with it is very important to me. I have a page on Facebook with close to 5,000 followers. And for me, telling the story of our heritage is not just 30 days, it's 365 days a year. I have a little posting on my Facebook page that says, "Our stories must be told." And because I do believe that by telling our stories, we inspire children who are having a hard time like I did. Now I'm going to transition to my life, how hard it was for me coming to this country. First of all, I had to leave my grandparents. I had to leave my cousins, everybody, coming to a country where everyone spoke a different language, and it was totally different from what I was used to. And but it at the beginning, I realized that somehow I didn't fit in, and it was going to be a challenge, to say the least, to fit in if I wanted it to work for me. Uh, when I first came, I there was a lot of discrimination uh, towards me and my sister in school because our background, because we spoke no English, and then on top of that, being poor didn't help the situation, and then the work that we did uh, when all the kids were having fun in the summertime, going to swimming pools and going camping, we had to work. Uh, in Colorado, the cash crop during that time were beets. And needless to say, when we arrived in Colorado, I didn't know why they were calling us betabeleros. Betabeleros means the beet workers. And essentially, that's what we did. We took over a job that was done first by Russian and German immigrants, later by Japanese. And then in the 50s, many of the Mexicanos started to come in. We were being contracted to come in and do the work in the fields, the beet fields. I was pretty lucky, I guess you could say, because I was too young to work in the fields. But like my sister was a little bit older. She was pulled out of school. She was only there for probably 6 months. Then she was pulled out because we needed to make more money, and the family needed her to work in the fields. So my sister had it a lot worse than I did. I only had to work in the summertime and then after school, but she had to work full time. Going through this, it was pretty rough. We were in college for many years, and although we made money in the summertime, the wintertime was a whole different story. Wintertime was a time when there was no work in the fields. And if you couldn't speak English and you didn't have the proper documentation, pretty much you were at the mercy of the government. There was nothing you could do, and so we had to depend on monthly checks from the government to survive. So this went on for quite some time until my parents realized that we had to come up with a different solution. We had to try something new. And many of the farm workers that were coming into Colorado were from Texas. They were called Tejanos. And with them, they brought a very important
My dad's Tejano.
massive. And so you know a lot about the music, right?
Of course,
Well,
yes.
Yeah.
And that's where I started to learn about Tejano music. They would have we would have parties on weekends, and one person would bring an accordion, another person would bring a guitar, and they would just play all night, and that's how I was exposed to the Tejano music. So when we eventually moved to Phoenix, a lot of the people in the barrios here thought I was Tejano because they didn't think I was Mexicano, because my accent had changed. You know, I was speaking more like a Tejano because I grew up with Tejanos. And so, you know, they said, well, you're a Tejano. And well, I said, well, you know, I'll let them think whatever they want. But go ahead. Anyway, when we first came to Phoenix, we got here because we were encouraged to leave Colorado by traveling migrant workers who would go from state to state. So my parents decided to load everything that we owned into a 1949 Chevy, and for Arizona, for Phoenix, where there was work practically year round. So we said goodbye to the potato fields of Colorado, to the beet fields, and we headed to Arizona. Got here, we arrived in a neighborhood which was called Campito. I didn't know at the time it was called Campito. To me, it was just this place that was so different, with lizards running around, and you know, coming from Colorado, this was something we didn't see. And we arrived at Barrio Campito, and when we arrived there, I didn't realize that this was a place where a lot of farm workers would arrive because it was centrally located, and Barrio Campito was where we stayed. It was just maybe half a mile from the downtown Phoenix, and that's where a lot of the farm workers would get up early in the morning. Back then, there was a lot of bars where the stadium is right now. It was full of bars, and at night they served their the traditional drinks. But early in the morning at 4 o'clock, all the labor buses would show up, and that's where our parents would go and take the bus and go work in the fields.
Was that in Tolleson?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Was that in Tolleson?
No. This was in Barrio Campito. This is in Barrio Campito, and I'm including this because not knowing that history was going to be made there. In fact, I had this T-shirt made, and it says Barrio Campito, history was made here. I didn't know Cesar Chavez was going to fast there. I didn't know I was going to be part of the farm worker movement. I had no clue. It just seems like, is it coincidental, if you will, or I don't know what to call it. But the truth of the fact is that we arrived in Barrio Campito, then back a few years later in 1972, that's when Cesar Chavez was fasting there. And so by that time, we had been living in Tolleson. And of course, we moved to Tolleson because back then, Tolleson was an agricultural town. Most of the kids that, were going to school with me in Tolleson were children of farm worker children, and we got along real good, and but having been exposed to the to the fact that I was a migrant farm worker, and having seen all the sacrifices that my parents went through and how they were belittled, and it just started to mold me into the person that I was later to become. So, needless to say, in the late '60s, when Cesar started to come to Tolleson, and give his speeches, and which you see here. Uh, uh, I at first I really didn't have a lot of interest because here I am, a teenager, and I'm trying to get away from all this life that I had endured, and I thought it was over. But then after listening to his speeches and listening to Gustavo Gutierrez, who was the director of the United Farm Workers Office in Tolleson, uh, my philosophy on life started to change. I no longer wanted to get away from it. I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to be involved. And so that's when, in 1969, something very important happened. There was a lot of labor activity, a lot of organizing. And in Tolleson, as I said earlier, Gustavo Gutierrez was the director of the United Farm Workers Office, and in fact, that's him back there in the background in this picture right here. Something very important happened, which I hope that someday Tolleson will use this as a teaching tool to teach the kids in Tolleson the importance of the UFW office, because right there in 1969 is when they had a march, a 4-day march. The farm workers had a 4-day march. They met in Tolleson on Easter Sunday. No, I take it back. 4 days prior to Easter Sunday, they marched for 4 days through Tolleson, through Avondale, Peoria, Guadalupe, to bring awareness of the plight of the farm workers. And then on Easter Sunday, we ended up at the Capitol. So this is very important, and it all started in Tolleson. So I really hope that maybe the city officials in Tolleson will take notice, because now that UFW office is gone and there is a house there in its place, but that history should never be lost. Our stories need to be told. And in addition to being involved there in Tolleson, as I mentioned earlier, I took a very strong desire to be very seriously involved, and I started doing a lot of volunteering with the United Farm. Then eventually, I became a labor organizer. I was pulled in, and I was part of the team that ran the office in El Mirage, and that's the office that you see there. Started helping organize farm workers, and that's me right there, the guy right there with that straw hat and patch on his pants. I didn't really care. I mean, it was. We were there to promote social justice. We were there to help the farm workers, and at the same time, we were there to make ourselves feel better for all that we had endured. And going through all this, you see yourself growing. You see yourself transitioning from the person that was out there in the field, and all that you went through begins to just fall into place, and you realize that that now it's time to take another step and do something a little different. And Cesar was the kind of person that he was a labor leader, true, but he was also a very charismatic person, and he believed very strong in education. And he would always tell me, you what are you going to do when when you leave the fields, when you quit organizing? I said, I don't know. And I kind of smirked, and I said, maybe I'll be a radio announcer. And he says, well, why don't you? He says, "Cesar, you know, I can't even speak Spanish right. And you want me to be a radio announcer?" He says, you can do it. And he says, where am I going to get the money to go to broadcasting school? He said, wow, let me think about it. And, 4 weeks later, one of his, helpers came and he says, hey, you want to go to school? And I said, for what? To be a radio announcer? I said, yeah, of course. Where am I going to get the money? He says, go to MOP. MOP is a program called the Migrant Opportunity Program. And, do their paperwork and see if you qualify. Well, being a farm worker and working in the fields, I qualified with flying colors and got a grant for $5,000 to go to broadcasting school. And I took advantage of it. Went to the Ron Bailey School of Broadcast, which is no longer here. It was right there on Central in McDowell. And I was at the right place at the right time when I graduated from Ron Bailey. There was an opening in a radio station back then. I think it was probably, I want to say 1980. They were looking for young, enthusiastic radio announcers who were bilingual and who were willing to do a bilingual format. I said, you know what? This is the ideal job that I'm looking for. But I didn't realize how tough it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. But first time I opened the mic, I was going to say my name, and I practically forgot my name. But you know what? That was the beginning of my media career.
We can all relate to that, Jose. I mean, being bilingual is so hard. Sometimes, you're saying something in English and then you're thinking of it in Spanish, or you want to say something in Spanish and then you're thinking of it in English, and then you end up speaking Spanglish. So
yeah, well, let me tell you how hard it was for me. When I first went to broadcasting school, I couldn't say chicken correctly. I would say chicken. And then my instructor said, if you want to make it in the radio, in the media, you're going to have to get rid of your accent. He says, right now, you got an accent so thick, you can cut it with a knife. I said, okay. So I went and bought me a cheap little tape recorder, got me a newspaper, and I would read the newspaper over and over. And then I would listen to my voice and I would see where I made the mistakes of, pronouncing the words the way they shouldn't be pronounced. So after that, I realized that I needed to work on my pronunciation, and I would sit there and pronounce that word over and over until I got it. And, I thank Ron Bailey, because if it wasn't for Ron Bailey, I would have never been able to be who I am, to pull out of my shell. And I didn't stop there. I wanted to, have the ability to speak in front of crowds and not be embarrassed. So I went to a school called Plaza 3, and everyone made fun of me. They said, "What, are you going to try to be an actor now?" I said, "No, but I need to. I'm like this rock that you got to polish, and if I don't use all the skills, I'll never be able to function, in the media world." So I went through Plaza 3.
I was going to say you're a true example of si se puede, right? I mean,
yes,
it's amazing, your life history. But I'm gonna interrupt you real quick, because I think it's also important to talk about the Tolleson right now has a large Latino and Hispanic population. And the fact that you're mentioning this about Tolleson gives me, as a reporter, a story idea. But I know also Laura has something to say about that. It's something that I think it's really important to bring. I mean, maybe we can start a conversation from there. So take it from here, Allison.
Yeah, well, so just reintroducing Dr. Laura Key back in the conversation. So if any of you are just joining us here, part of the ABC15 kickoff to Hispanic Heritage Month, we're joined by Dr. Laura Key, who works with the Arizona Historical Society, and Jose Cortez, who is telling a little bit about his story, which is a part of Arizona history and history period. He was a labor organizer with Cesar Chavez. And so in talking about Tolleson, part of that is history that you can speak a little bit to as well, Dr. Key. Can you pick it up from there?
Sure. I was listening to Jose, and I absolutely that the stories need to be told. Our stories are important. And it was interesting that you mentioned, we don't want to lose the culture. We don't want to lose the language. We don't want to lose these stories. And, Arizona had a Hispanic Mexican population that was dominant until the 1920s. And in the 1890s, a group of Mexican American men founded Alianza Hispano-Americana, which was a benefit mutual society, a mutualista, to preserve Mexican Spanish culture. Anyways, the group, continued on through the war, became a huge home front association. But after the war, they turned their attention to civil rights. And one of the very first cases that Alianza's leaders, Ralph Estrada and Gregory Garcia, took on was segregation of Mexican American children in Tulsa. Sometimes when we think about segregation, we think of the black and white binary. But here in the Southwest, we have such a multi-ethnic, multiracial, population and other Southwest cities too, Los Angeles and El Paso, right, and Phoenix and parts of Colorado. They would set up Mexican schools, and it would be, to segregate the Mexican children, and they would, Anglo officials would say, it's because of language. But it wasn't really all because of language. But in 1949, Alianza's leaders filed suit on the Gonzales-Chile court case, and they took it to the Arizona U.S. District Court of Arizona, saying that segregating Mexican Americans was unconstitutional. And they used because people of Mexican descent are considered white by law from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended the Mexican-American War. So they fought, they were fighting that, it's illegal to segregate Mexican American children. The U.S. Constitution, and finally in Arizona in 1951, agreed with that and declared that Mexican schools and segregating Mexican American schools in Arizona was unconstitutional with the Arizona Constitution. So Tolleson became almost like the test case for here in Arizona, and it spread right to the Glendale school district, which was highly segregated for Mexican Americans. So it's really interesting that you see this. It starts with schools, right? Segregation in schools and clamping down on culture. And that's what really Alianza wanted, right? Is to spread that language and bilingualism, like you were talking about, so important. Whereas third generation Mexican Americans like myself have lost the language because we didn't grow up with it, right? Because our parents were punished for speaking Spanish in schools, right? And this is what Alianza wanted to prevent. It comes full circle that you get this Mexican American group, and then you start fighting for civil rights and then labor rights. And we see this today of trying to outlaw Mexican American studies in public schools and English only and everything. But so this has been a long battle, but Arizona really has some amazing history about Hispanics in Arizona that represent so much larger of the civil rights movement, of World War II, of just present day border issues that stretch back 200 years, right? So it's one of the reasons that I love working at the Arizona Historical Society, right? Is that we care for those papers, that I use every day and that really tell the story of people like Jose here.
Yeah, and actually, I think a lot of our viewers are getting they're relating to the topic about language in specific. Annalie, like you say there, sometimes you can either, English or Spanish, they won't come out. And I think that happens to all of us. For me, I grew up in Mexico, knew only Spanish most of my life, came here and had to learn a new language. So for me, seeing and hearing everything that you guys are talking about, it's so informative, because growing up in Mexico, I was in this little bubble, right? And I came here and I learned a lot about what being a Mexican American and Hispanic and Latino means. And so, and it's really interesting that you're talking about how you guys were punished for speaking Spanish. I remember when I first came here to the US, I couldn't understand why other Latinos wouldn't speak Spanish, right? And then as I started talking to older people, I realized that there was this whole history behind it, and how they would discriminate because they were speaking in Spanish. So the parents would protect them, and by telling them not to speak the language. And so if you can tell us more a little bit about that, like, was that something that was happening all around the US, Laura? Or maybe with you, Allison, like, you grew up here, is that something that maybe your family also can relate to?
So just quickly to jump in this, and then I want to take it to our experts here. Many of you know I'm from Chicago originally, and there is a huge Hispanic, Latin, population there, and a huge Mexican population. And so I did not get much issue with people speaking another language, whether it was Spanish, Polish. There's a huge Polish population there. Korean. It was embraced. It wasn't until I moved to Yuma, Arizona, close to San Luis, where Cesar Chavez is from and born, and so it all kind of ties in there. That I was able to learn, just like everyone else, about this history, and why I think you can still see, thanks, Kathy, see a disconnect sometimes with Hispanic Americans here than you might in other parts of the country, which is very interesting that you both may speak to, being so close, being in a border state, being so close to another country that speaks this language. There's history there, and we still see that to this day, play out.
Absolutely, right. And, like the men and women of Alianza thought bilingualism was actually a huge benefit for the cross-border trading that took place it really made Southern Arizona and Tucson, right? People like Ochoa and Carrillo, right, and Jacome, they kind of built this economy down here in Southern Arizona, and they needed bilingualism, right? And then we get kind of a tampering down on this after World War II and the Cold War, right, where everybody wants to be more American, right? So we see more of this anti-Spanish laws. And when I say laws, they weren't like codified laws, mostly in school districts. Los Angeles has a huge Mexican-American population back then and today. And students, if they spoke Spanish, could be paddled in the middle of class. And that happened all across the Southwest, right? In Texas, in Arizona, in Southern California. In the Midwest also saw a large population of Mexican Americans, and later on other Latin Americans, primarily because of the railroad that would sponsor people from Mexico to come to work for the railroad, Southern Pacific, Union Pacific, and they would work up in the Midwest, in Detroit and Chicago and everything. So you have this a migration of Mexican Americans and Latin Americans that bring their culture, but then it also brings up this against, this un-American idea that speaking anything but English is accepted. So it's really interesting that, that we kind of forget, because bilingualism is basically seen today as an advantage again, right? And you can see ESL classes and foreign languages being very popular in high school and colleges. It wasn't always like that in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, and talking about culture, I want to move forward in history a little bit because I just love this part of history in America. It is lowriders, and I know, Jose, you are an expert with cruising and lowriders. I live in South Phoenix, and so I know here on Central and South Phoenix used to be like the place where people will go cruising until they make it illegal. So, Jose, can you talk to us a little bit more about that? And I know that Cesar Chavez also kind of had a little bit to do with that part of history here in Phoenix.
Sure. Many people are under the impression that low riding, cruising started in the 60s and 70s. But coming from Colorado and coming from the migrant farm worker environment, I can tell you that in the 1950s, I was watching the older guys fill up the trunks of their cars with rocks and bricks, and this was their lowrider. I mean, they didn't know about cutting springs or shocks or anything. They figured, well, we'll drop the car, and this is going to be our lowrider. The only problem is when you're a farm worker and you're working on the field, you come to an area where there's a little dip. You had to take all the rocks out. And you put them back in. But this essentially was the beginning of an idea that, we couldn't identify with your traditional fancy car because we didn't have them. So what we did is, well, what they did, I mean, I was just a kid then, but I watched the older ones, to make them different and to make something that was ours and that we could identify with. It turned into a lowrider. And so that image stayed with me. And when I came to Arizona in the late 60s, there was lowriders, but there wasn't that many. And then I started to remember, they're doing the same thing that they did in Colorado, but now they have these fancy gadgets that make the car, they cut the springs, or they get the hydraulics, and so needless to say, I started to see this, and I would appreciate it even more because I already had a foundation for it coming from Colorado and watching, how they transformed their family cars into lowriders. So in the early 70s, when Cesar was organizing, there was a lot of individuals that would go to see him at Santa Rita where he was fasting, and they would take their lowrider cars. But I started to see, as time went on, I started to see more and more Hispanics, Chicanos, getting involved with lowriding because it essentially gave them a sense of belonging. It was something that was totally yours. It was, and then when a lot of the individuals that came back, from the war, who had knowledge of hydraulics and knowledge of working with airplanes, started to use that knowledge to improve their lowriders. And so in the probably about mid 70s, that's when you started to really see the lowriders really becoming strong here in the Phoenix area. There was, on weekends, Central was packed. I mean, you could not go if you needed to go someplace. You better make sure that you took your time because you were going to be there a long time. And so that was the start of a problem that was created in South Phoenix. So because of that, and because there was a lot of congregation of people, the city of Phoenix said no more cruising. And so a lot of the people that were cruising South Central just needed to find other places to cruise. And unfortunately, everywhere you went, it was the same situation. You're a gang member, uh, you're here to create problems. And granted, there's a lot of youngsters that did do that, but the majority of them were individuals that just embraced the lowrider movement and embraced the cars and everything that went with it. They wanted to have fun, but it didn't happen. So it got to the point where there was really no more place to cruise. Then something happened. Lowriders, car clubs realized that in order to continue cruising, you had to change your image. You had to do things that were positive. So you begin to see a lot of car clubs doing toy drives, having events to raise money for schools, raising money for funerals. And so to this day, you'll see that a lot of the car clubs still continue to do that. And it literally has given individuals an identity that they can embrace and call their own.
Yeah, and Jose, if I may, in that, it's one of those things that has permeated through American culture as well, that we see. The first thing that comes to my mind, one person is Gwen Stefani, who had some chola aesthetic going through her. I mean, she's from, California. So what she grew up with, what she saw, incorporating that into some of her music and videos and look at a time. And recently read an article about a group of Japanese women who in Japan who are cholas right now. And so this conversation and this whole month, really the point is to share and learn more about the ways, Hispanic and Latin Americans contribute to American society. This history is American history, which I think sometimes can be lost on some people just as much as, African American history and Asian American history. All of that is American history too, and is tied into the fabric of what this country is, that's meant to be a melting pot. And so to that point, we've talked a lot about the amazing, Mexican American history that is tied here to our state. And many people know that Mexico will be celebrating Independence Day with a grito tomorrow. But there's a reason why the month starts today. And maybe Dr. Key, you can explain why that month starts today.
Absolutely, it's kind of weird that it starts in the middle of in the middle of a month, right? Well, the reason started with President Johnson, and he picked September 15th because several Latin American countries celebrate their independence during this period. Independence from Spain, obviously, like Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. They celebrate their independence tomorrow, like you said, Mexico Independence Day, and then Chile is on September 17th. So Johnson picked that day to cover it a whole, that week, and then Reagan on the next month. But to encapsulate that, it really is Latin America, Central America, Hispanic heritage a month, and not just Mexican. We concentrate on that because we're here in Arizona, but other Hispanics, Latin Americans have made contributions to Arizona also.
Yeah, and it's very obvious, right? When we do a lot of Mexican history, Mexican American history, it's so tied into Arizona, and we see it more being a border state. And we're able to learn so much about it being here. You just have to go and research. And Lily, we can even speak to a little bit of the, diverse faces that we have here celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month at ABC 15. Our own Claudia Rupsich is Venezuelan, and many
Jose
others.
Torres, puertorriqueño and mexicano.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. And we are going to have, this whole month, you guys, we're preparing amazing stories for everyone. So make sure you tune in to ABC 15. I know Allison and I are working really hard to bring you a lot of different stories. And if you have any ideas, please send it to us. Everything is important. We'll try our best to cover it. And then like good Latinos, you guys, we can stay here and talk forever. I know I can stay here and talk forever, but we only have like about a minute left. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and obviously you guys for coming here and talk to us about this amazing month.
Yeah, and so quickly before we leave, I want to give you guys the opportunity. So say we can start with you on how people can reach out to you. I think we did put the link on your Facebook in the comments. Is that the best way to keep up with you and learn a little bit more about your story?
Yes, absolutely, Allison. You can reach me on Facebook. I've got close to 5,000 followers. When I left Chicanos por la Causa, I decided that I needed to stay in touch with my community, and I created that page, so that I can reach out to my constituents and all my followers.
All right, perfect. And Dr. Key, how can we learn more about this history? And are you going to be having any special displays or anything? How can we stay in touch?
Absolutely. Well, our museums are open, so Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 2. And, we welcome you to come down. And, in Tucson here, there's a little bit more about Spanish colonialism, obviously, being Southern Arizona and everything. And I encourage people to go look in the archives. We have some wonderful, Mexican American, Latin American exhibits and documents and photographs that really, they need to be shared and everything. And, like I was talking about Alianza Hispano-Americana, we have their newsletters right from the 1920s till the 1970s. This is, you can see the process of languages and the importance of their culture that they continued here in Arizona. And that's just a small sample of everything. So I encourage people to go to Arizona Historical Society, make an appointment to go in the archives and look around and look at our exhibits and understand what kind of contributions that Hispanics have made to Arizona and U.S. history on a whole.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being involved. We really appreciate all the comments. It was a great conversation to have. Lily, thank you for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's fun. I was so excited to do this with you guys. So buenas tardes to everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in.
Buenas tardes.